So today's topic is interplay of accounting, ICDS and income tax. We'll first deal with the history of interplay of accounts and tax. So what role accountancy has in computation of income under the head business income or in computation of income under the head income from other sources. This is because the other heads of income like income from house property, salary and capital gains, they have a specific mechanism, and these chapters don't follow section 145 or 145 does not apply to these chapters. So accountancy becomes relevant only for computing your business income or income from other sources. So what is the relevance of accountancy? Courts have accepted commercial accounting practices. Now this is because under section 145, which is existing since long time, one has to either follow cash system of accounting or mercantile system of accounting, whichever is regularly employed. And when one speaks of mercantile system of accounting, there is no definition in the Income Tax Act of the mercantile system of accounting. So one looks at the commercial accounting practices or the normal accounting practices or the accounting standards issued by the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India to determine what is generally followed by public at large. It also becomes relevant and a guiding factor while determining the total income under the Income Tax Act as held by various courts. For the first time in 1995, central government was given power to notify certain accounting standards. Using this power, they notified two accounting standards. The first one was disclosure of significant accounting policies, and two was disclosure of prior period and extraordinary items and changes in accounting policies. Really speaking, had a very little role to play in computation of income. Of course, now these two standards have been superseded by the ICDS, which have been made applicable with effect from AY 1780. In 2010 December, the CBTT thought that we should come out with our own accounting standards, tax accounting standards. Now, the thought behind this was that the institute has rolled out Ind AS. They're going to ultimately converge into IFRS. Some entities are required to follow IFRS. Some entities are required to not follow IFRS, and they are required to follow accounting standards. And therefore, there are varying treatments to different kinds of persons. We want to standardize it so far as Income Tax Act is concerned. And therefore, the thought of constituting a tax accounting standard committee. This, in fact, is coming out in their reply affidavit, which was filed in Chambers case, that what is the logic of coming out with ICDS. In August 2012, they came out with 14 tax accounting standards. And the nomenclature was changed from tax accounting standards to income computation and disclosure standards. Now, income computation and disclosure standards, as the name suggests, it's only for the purpose of computation and disclosure, not for the purpose of maintenance of the books of accounts. In January 2015, 12 draft ICDS were released. They were made applicable with effect from 31st March 15 by notification number 32 of 15 with effect from AY 1670. But then they realized, and because of the report of the issuer committee, that ICDS is creating some problem, postpone it. Therefore, the implementation of ICDS was postponed by 1 year, and they say it is due to practical difficulty. Via notification number 86 of 16. Finally, 10 ICDS were notified. Video notification number 87 of 16, dated 29 September, and which were made applicable with effect from AY 17. This is the journey of ICDS. It does not stop here. To clarify, or to rather complicate things, they came out with a circular number 10 of 17, giving clarification in respect of 25 questions. This is the latest trend which the government is following in issuing clarifications, may and may not be useful or relevant or creating complications, which actually happened with this circular. Chamber of Tax Consultant was not very happy and pleased with the mode opted by the government in coming out with ICDS, and especially the clarifications in circular number 10. And therefore, they challenged everything before the Delhi High Court. The Delhi High Court was pleased to pass the order on 8th of November 17. It cost certain ICDS in toto, completely cost. Some of the ICDS were read down to the extent of some of the parts of the ICDS. And the power of the government to notify ICDS under section 145(2) was also read down. The judgment of Delhi High Court remains unchallenged, but they thought that the better way to overcome this judgment is to bring out amendments in the Finance Act to amend the Act itself. And therefore, they came out with various amendments by Finance Act 18 with retrospective effect from AY 1718 to overrule the judgment of the Honorable Delhi High Court. Now, it is for us to see whether they have really overruled the judgment or not. In my view, they have not. They have failed. There is something called as legislative misfire, which we'll discuss in today's session. So this is the history of the accounts and interplay of accounts with tax. Now, there are judgments laid down by the Supreme Court and the other high courts. Really speaking, we'll go into judgments of the Supreme Court, what they say about the relevance of accounting standards or the accounting practices for computing your total income. Now, if I have to go to chapter 4D of the Income Tax Act, which deals with profits and gains of business and profession, we have various sections starting from section 28, which is charging, section 29, which provides a machinery, and then 30 to 37 deals with the allowances under the income tax for deduction for computing business income. 40 to 43 around deals with the disallowances, something which is not allowable. And then there are certain deeming fictions. What is taxable is specified in section 28. So a complete code is there in the Income Tax Act itself to compute your total income. Further, for computing income, one has to go to section 145, which is one has to follow mercantile system of accounting. While following mercantile system of accounting, there may be some issues which are not answered by the provisions of the Income Tax Act. And therefore, to that extent, the courts have said that, okay, you can refer to the accounting practices or the guidance note or the accounting standards prescribed by the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India. So the first judgment in this regard is of the Supreme Court in case of Challapalli Sugar Limited, 98 ITR 167. This was a case where assessee had borrowed funds to purchase or construct a capital asset. Till the time asset was put to use, they had incurred certain interest expenditure, which was claimed as a deduction. So it was claimed as a deduction for the purpose of computing income under the Income Tax Act, but insofar as the books of accounts are concerned, they capitalize it following the accounting standards. The department said, no, this is not allowable, this has to be capitalized. This is a case which is prior to the proviso to section 3613 and the proviso in section 43.1 actual cost. So here the court says, no, you have to refer to the accounting standards prescribed, you have to refer to the accounting principles. And since the accounting principles requires the interest expense to be capitalized, which is incurred till the date asset is put to use, you have to capitalize this interest, you cannot claim deduction. This was the very first judgment of the Supreme Court on this aspect specifically. And again, the Supreme Court has laid down this or reiterated this principle in UP State Industrial Development Corporation. Then we had a very latest Supreme Court judgment in case of Virtual Soft System. Here the Supreme Court was dealing with taxation of lease transactions. The lease rentals have to be bifurcated into interest portion and the principal portion. To the extent of principal portion, it cannot be taxed. To the extent of interest portion, it has to be either allowed as a deduction in the hands of the payer and it has to be taxed as income in the hands of the recipient. This is as per the guidance note on the lease transactions, and the Supreme Court in case of Virtual Soft Systems held that yes, you have to refer to the guidance note because it provides a relevant guidance in this regard, and therefore you have to follow it. But there is a caution. One has to refer to the Supreme Court judgment, larger bench judgment in Cuticor and Alkali, 3-bench judgment, where they say that Challapalli Sugar Work is of course applicable, but they have distinguished Challapalli Sugar Work. This was a case where assessee borrowed some money for the purpose of acquisition of an asset. Said money, the sum of money which was borrowed was temporarily parked in a fixed deposit, and they earned certain interest income on such fixed deposit. As per the accounting standards, such interest income was reduced from the cost of the asset or reduced from the interest paid by the assessee on the loan, and the balance amount was capitalized. The department said, no, you have to tax this as your income from other sources. You cannot reduce it from your cost. Assessee argued that, see, as per Challapalli Sugar Work, you have to apply the accounting standards and accounting practices, and we have applied that. And since we have applied that, you cannot tax me separately on this aspect. Supreme Court said, no, nothing doing. the receipt of an interest is taxable as per the provisions of the Act, and the accounting practice cannot supervene over the provisions of the Act. We have very often referred to the accounting practices for ascertaining the profit made by the company. But when the question is whether receipt of money is taxable or not, or whether certain deductions are allowable or not, they have to be decided as per the provisions of the Act, not in accordance with the accountancy practice. So in a nutshell, the judgments say that if there is a specific provision of the Income Tax Act which deals with either accrual of income or taxability of income or allowability of any expenses, deductions, etc., then such provisions should be preferred. And if the provisions are silent, then you refer to the accountancy practices, what accountancy say, etc. So this is insofar as the account and the income tax interplay is concerned. Now the ICDS have been notified under section 145 of the Act. Section 145 is something I refer to as parent section, because under this section they derive the power to notify ICDS. Now section 145(1) says that income chargeable under two heads, business income and income from other sources, shall be subject to provisions of subsection 2, be computed in accordance with cash or mercantile system regularly employed by the assessor. So nothing new. You have to either compute your business income or income from other sources, either following cash or mercantile, whatever is regularly employed. Earlier, even the hybrid system was allowed because they only used the word regular method of accounting regularly employed by the assessor. Now, to bring in ICDS, they inserted the words subject to the provisions of subsection 2. And it is just really subsection 2 which empowers government to notify ICDS. The central government may notify in official gazette from time to time income computation and disclosure standards to be followed by any class of assessee or in respect of any class of. So they have the power to notify ICDS under 145. Consequence of not following ICDS is draconian and specified in 145(3), which says that if you don't follow ICDS, we will make a best judgment assessment. Now, according to me, it's not so draconian, because if I don't follow ICDS, you make a best judgment assessment. That does not mean you have very wide power or discretionary power. At the most, what you can do is apply ICDS and compute my income. You cannot go beyond that. You have to just apply ICDS and compute my income. So the risk is to that extent. They cannot reject the books of accounts and apply some ad hoc percentage to compute your income. That should not happen ideally, but of course you can never trust some of the officers. So this is the parent section. Now it also becomes imperative for us to understand the interplay of section 145 vis-a-vis section 5 of the Act. Now section 4 of the Income Tax Act is a charging section, and section 5 deals with scope of total income. Insofar as a person resident in India is concerned, the scope of total income includes income accrued or deemed to accrue in India, received or deemed to received in India, or income accruing or deemed to, or income accruing at any place other than India. So income accruing anywhere received in India, wherever it is received, it's taxable under the Income Tax Act insofar as a resident is concerned. Whereas insofar as a non-resident is concerned, only income accruing or deemed to accruing in India or received or deemed to be received in India is taxable. Income accruing and received outside India is not taxable. Now section 5 is subject to provisions of this Act. So therefore what happened was a company earned certain income outside India. It was in the nature of business income. It earned certain income outside India, say for example in Great Britain, United Kingdom. The said money was never brought to India, and the company followed cash system of accounting. So they say that since I follow cash system of accounting, when I go to section 5, I don't have to look at the conditions, income accruing or deemed to accrue in India or income accruing outside India. I have to just look at the condition of income received or deemed to be received in India. And since this income is not received in India, I will not offer it to tax. It was in this situation that the Madras High Court in case of Standard Triumph Motors held that, no boss, section 145 is a machinery provision. It cannot qualify charging section, that is section 5, and make the latter obvious. So if as per section 5, your income is taxable when it accrues either in India or outside India, you have to offer it to tax in India, irrespective of Section 145. And just because you are following caste system of accounting does not mean Section 5A1 and 51A and 5A1C becomes otious or redundant. Same view was taken by the Madras High Court in case of Velayutham and motor credit. The point which I am trying to drive home is that Section 5 prevails over Section 145, and therefore Section 5 shall also prevail over the ICDS notified. One cannot say that ICDS would prevail over the provisions of the Income Tax Act, which has in fact been clarified by the ICDS itself. So this is the interplay of Section 145 vis-a-vis Section 5. Now, there are certain findings of the Delhi High Court which become relevant while discussing each ICDS. Therefore, I have thought of discussing those findings of the Delhi High Court in the beginning itself. Delhi High Court judgment in case of Chamber of Tax Consultants. So, as everybody is aware that ICDS is a delegated piece of legislation. Power to legislate, to make law, to enact act is with the parliament, legislature. But the parliament is quite busy, and therefore they shall not come out with they shall not cover each and every aspect of the law. What they do is they make out a broad provisions, and some of the smaller items and incidental items are delegated to the executive, the government, the bureaucracy, which in the present case is CBDT. There are certain limitations imposed on the power of the executive when they exercise their power of delegated piece of it. In the context of Income Tax Act, the Delhi High Court held that following are essential legislative functions, which means following can only be amended or incorporated by the parliament by way of an act. It cannot be done by an executive by way of a notification. What are the essential legislative functions? Changing the basic principles of accounting that has been recognized in various provisions of the act, changing the method of accounting, alteration of system of accounting or according accounting or taxing treatment to a particular transaction, and to make a law to override judicial precedents. Now, if in my last lecture also, and I have discussed that, and everybody is aware that ICDS, the primary purpose of ICDS appears to be to overcome some of the judgments, which we'll also see later in the presentation. High Court says that yes, you can overcome a judgment of any High Court or Supreme Court, but that cannot be done by way of a notification. If you want to do that, then you can do by way of amending the Income Tax Act by the Parliament. So these powers cannot be delegated to an executive by the legislature. Court further held that ICDS intends to prevail over judicial precedents, and ICDS has the effect of modifying the basis for computation of taxable income as recognized by the Act and as interpreted by the court. So when I refer to the provisions of the Act as interpreted by the court. So if there is a judgment of the court in respect of a particular provisions of the Act, then that judgment becomes the interpretation of that particular provision. That cannot be undone by way of a notification. But the court held that no, ICDS intentions appears to be to prevail over judicial precedents and to modify the basis of computation of taxable income. The department gave the reason that we have already discussed earlier, that since there are different accounting treatments for different kinds of assessee, therefore we want to come out with a standard tax accounting standard which is common for all the assessees for computation of income. The court held that this is not a good reason, because as held by Tuticorin Alkali, Supreme Court in case of Tuticorin Alkali, accounting standard hardly has any role to play in determination of income, and it has to be done as per the provisions of the Act and as per the judicial precedents. So this cannot be a reason to really come out with ICDS. So therefore, in order to preserve its constitutionality, to make it a valid law, court read down the powers of the government to notify ICDS under 145(2), so as to not override the binding precedents or the provisions of, which means now by way of a notification under 145(2), the government cannot notify anything which has the effect of overriding judicial precedents or to go against the settled provisions of the income tax. So this was the finding of the Delhi High Court, which remains unchallenged and therefore concluded. In fact, at various paras of the judgment, they have said that certain paras of ICDS are directly in conflict with judgments. To that extent, the court has held that the judgments cannot be overruled by the ICDS, and to that extent, ICDS are not valid. But there may be certain other cases where judgments are in conflict with the Act or with the notification or the ICDS, and the Delhi High Court has not given any finding. In such case also, Delhi High Court has given a common finding which says ICDS is not meant to overrule the provisions of the Act, rules, and the judicial precedents. Therefore, at any place you find a conflict between the provisions of ICDS and a judgment, certainly the judgment has to prevail over ICDS. The question number 2 of the circular, which says that the judgments will get sidetracked by the provisions of the ICDS, is now rendered invalid by the Delhi High Court. So these are the some of the important findings of the Delhi High Court, which will have a common implication for all the ICDS, and therefore it is discussed at the beginning. There may arise certain issues regarding the binding precedents of the Delhi High Court ruling. So the first question which may come to somebody's mind is, this is a judgment of the Delhi High Court. Will it have a pan-India application? The answer to this question has to be yes in positive, because one, it deals with a central act which is applicable all over India. Two, there are no contrary ruling of any other high court, and therefore it should be applicable to all assessees all over India. Lastly, it is certainly binding on the respondents before the Delhi High Court. Now, the respondents before the Delhi High Court were the Government of India, and therefore it is certainly binding on the Income Tax Department, and they have to abide by this. Second point, which we have already discussed, what about the other issues where ICDS run contrary to the rulings, but which is not dealt with by the Delhi High Court? So there are certain rulings which have not specifically been pointed or argued at the time of the judgment. What if the provision of ICDS is running contrary to this judgment? As we have already discussed, there is a common para 102, subpara 2, which says that ICDS are not meant to overrule the judgments, and therefore those judgments should have a precedence over the provisions of the ICDS. Lastly, what if after the ICDS has been notified, there are certain judgments which interpret the provisions of the Act, and ICDS have been notified which is contrary to such judgment? So, of course, these judgments should pertain to assessment year 16, 17 or prior years, and the courts have laid down certain principles, and the ICDS laid down a contrary provisions. In such case, if the courts have interpreted the provisions of the Act, then those provisions of the Act will be interpreted in such manner. Judgment is there to interpret the provisions, not to lay down any law. And therefore, to that extent, ICDS cannot overrule the judgments of the courts. ICDS cannot have precedence, and therefore judgments have to be followed. These are the three important questions. Now, this becomes very interesting when one looks at the manner in which the government proceeded. Now, ICDS 1, 2, and 6 have been completely struck down. ICDS 3, 4, 7, 8, and 9 have been struck down in parts. This judgment remains unchallenged. Therefore, the notifications as struck down by the High Court remains as it is. They came out with amendment by Finance Act 2018. Now, if you look at the various amendments, which of course we'll look at the relevant point in my presentation, all the amendments refer to ICDS notified under the Act, either for computation purpose or for other purpose. the amendments will have effect only if ICDS are in place. So, for example, Section 36(1)(18) says that mark-to-market loss or other expected loss shall be allowed as per in accordance with the ICDS. Or Section 43 CB says that the works contract or the construction contract or service contracts have to follow percentage completion method in accordance with ICDS. Each and every amendment refers to ICDS, but they have not come out with a new notification. Old notification has been struck down in parts. Does that mean by way of a retrospective amendment, the old notification gets automatically revived? Judgment of the Delhi High Court is automatically reversed? In my humble view, the answer is no. Notifications once quashed, either you challenge it and get it revived, or you come out with a new notification. Till that point of time, the ICDS as struck down by the Delhi High Court will remain in place. So as on date, there are no ICDS 1, there is no ICDS 2, there is no ICDS 6. And some of the portions of ICDS 4, 5, 7, 8, and 9 remains quashed, and there is no such portion of ICDS in the statute book because they have not yet come out with a new notification. Therefore, most of the amendments which they have brought out becomes toothless or ineffective because they refer to ICDS, but the ICDS are not in place. This, of course, we will discuss in greater detail as and when we discuss each of the ICDS. The amendment which was brought out by the Finance Act 18, they specify why they have brought this amendment in the wake of recent judicial precedents to regularize the compliance by large number of taxpayers so as to prevent any further inconvenience to them. That is the reason why they came out with a retrospective amendment as per the explanatory memorandum to Finance Bill 18. Some of the essential features of ICDS will quickly run through. It is applicable to all the SSEs following mercantile system of accounting. Therefore, if one follows cash system of accounting, he or she is not governed by ICDS. Like the chartered accountants who follow cash system of accounting, ICDS is not applicable. Further, it is not applicable to individuals or HUF who is not required to get his account audited as per the provisions of 144 AB of. Only if tax audit is applicable in a previous year to an individual HUF, it is applicable. In case of all other persons, it is applicable. It's only relevant for the purpose of computing income under the head business income or income from other sources, binding. But when I come to the other chapters like capital gains, we may refer to ICDS to derive some help. It does not have any binding value. For example, cost of an asset is prescribed in ICDS 5. It may be relevant for determining cost for the purpose of capitalizing it in the block of asset, but it will not have a binding value when you compute the cost of acquisition while calculating capital gains. These are effective from AY 1780, and as per the clarifications issued by the department, these are not for the purpose of maintenance of books of accounts, but only for the purpose of computation of income. So don't follow ICDS and make amendments in your books of accounts. It's only for the purpose of computation of income. So in our normal computation, when we start with not net profit as per profit and loss account, add certain items, reduce certain items, and then we come as taxable income. ICDS effects have to be given at this stage of computation of income. The starting point will still remain the same, which is net profit as per profit and loss. Fortunately, the ICDS says that in case of conflict between the Act rules and the ICDS, the Act rule shall prevail, which of course has to be the position. You cannot say ICDS will prevail over the Act and rules, because it is the parent Act under which you derive the power to notify ICDS. Lastly, it will not apply for computation of book profits under 115JB. It is MAT in case of a company. However, for the purpose of computing alternate minimum tax, in the case of persons other than company, because the mechanism to compute AMT is the computation of taxable income under the Act, ICDS will apply while computing such alternate minimum tax. With this, let us start with the ICDS per se. I mean, today's topic, today's session, we are discussing 5 ICDS, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. The chronologically will go. First ICDS is ICDS 1 accounting policies. Firstly, I'll give a brief history about narration about the ICDS provisions. Secondly, what did the Delhi High Court say? Thirdly, what is the amendment which has been brought out in the Finance Act? And lastly, therefore, what are the issues arising as a result of the sangam of all three? So this is the pattern which I'll follow for all the ICDS. What does ICDS 1 deal with? It deals with the accounting policies and accounting standards which one apply for computation of taxable income. They have prescribed fundamental accounting assumptions like going concern, consistency, approval. Most important provision of ICDS 1 was, while adopting accounting policies, one has to look at two things. The treatment and presentation of transactions shall be governed by their substance and not merely their form. And two, mark-to-market loss or an expected loss shall not be recognized unless the recognition of such loss is in accordance with the provisions of any ICDS. So while considering the parameters for selection of accounting policies, one, you have to prefer substance over. Two, you don't have to follow prudence. Prudence is negatively defined here, that mark-to-market loss and expected loss shall not be recognized unless allowed under other provisions of the Act. So these are the main two provisions of ICDS 1 for which ICDS 1 is in the notification. Lastly, they say that accounting policy shall not be changed without reasonable clause and the disclosure requirement of the accounting policies. In all, it is similar to your AS1 except the prudence part. What did the Delhi High Court say? Chamber of Tax Consultants argued that the concept of prudence is there in AS1. The old AS1 issued by CBDT under 145. Concept of prudence is there recognized by the Accounting Standard 1 issued by ICAI. The concept of prudence has been embedded in the section 37(1), where they use the word reduction of expenses laid out or expended for the purpose of business. In fact, the concept of prudence is embedded in section 37(1) is also the view of ICAI in the guidance note. And lastly, courts have accepted the concept of prudence while computing income. As a result of all four arguments, we argued that ICDS 1 does not recognize, or rather has a negative provision insofar as prudence is concerned. You will not be allowed losses, expected losses, except as provided by ICDS. This goes against various judicial precedents and the concept of prudence accepted by the Act itself. Accordingly, the court has struck down the entire ICDS 1. Entire ICDS 1 goes because the concept of prudence, ICDS 1, which does away with the concept of prudence, is contrary to the Act and the binding judicial precedents. Corresponding amendments in Form 3CD and any clarification in the circular is struck down. So, if ICDS 1 goes, the entire disclosure requirement of ICDS 1 goes. And if that goes, in your Form 3CD, you are not supposed to recognize any disclosure in respect of ICDS 1. So this has been the judgment of the Delhi High Court. Now let us see what amendments have been brought out by the Finance Act. As we have already spoken, the logic behind ICDS 1 was to do away with the concept of prudence. Accordingly, they only amended the Act to the extent of de-recognizing the concept of prudence. That is done by introducing a clause in section 36(1) and a subsection under section 40 capital A. Section 36(1) deals with various allowances while computing income under section 28. One of the allowances specified under section 36(1) by way of Finance Act 2018 is mark-to-market loss or other expected loss as computed in accordance with ICDS notified under subsection 201. So you will be allowed mark-to-market loss or expected loss which is computed in accordance with ICDS. And section 40A subsection 13 says No deduction or allowance shall be allowed in respect of any mark-to-market loss or other expected loss, except as allowable under section 36(1). So why an amendment in section 36(1)? Because courts have held that 37 itself recognizes the concept of prudence. And 37 applies only if a particular item of expense or deduction is not governed by other provisions. Therefore, now they say that mark-to-market loss or expected loss is specifically governed by 36(1), and therefore 37 should not have any implication. And secondly, they provide for a negative clause under 40A. Now, let me draw the attention of the member to a most commonly used word in most of the amendments carried out by Finance Act 18, which is computed. So they say mark-to-market loss or other expected loss as computed in accordance with ICDs. Only for computation I go to ICDs. What is allowable and what is not allowable is not specified by ICDs. Job or the role of ICDs to only give me a computation mechanism for computing mark-to-market loss or other expected loss. Now, what are the implications arising as a result of Sangam of all three? Concept of prudence has now been done away with, because you will be allowed mark-to-market loss or expected loss only if it is allowed by ICDs. There are only 10 ICDs. 10 ICDs prescribes certain loss to be allowed, expected loss or mark-to-market. Only that loss is allowable while computing a income. All other losses are not allowed because of section 36(1)(18), read with ICDs, read with section 40A 30. So this concept of prudence has now been done away. Second, as we have already discussed, ICDs section 36(1)(18) uses the word computed in accordance with ICDs. I only go to ICDs for looking at the computation part. ICDs cannot say which expected loss or mark-to-market loss is allowable or not allowed. Now, if you compare the wordings of para 4(2) of ICDs 1, it states that mark-to-market loss or an expected loss shall not be recognized unless recognition is in accordance with ICDs. Now, this provision of para 4(2) is not in sync with section 36(1)(18) because 36(1)(18) only says your role is computation. You don't prescribe what is allowable or what is not allowed. Para 4(2) says nothing is allowable except allowed by other ICDs. Now, that is clearly not the role of ICDs, and therefore para 2 is not in sync with ICDs. In any case, ICDs 1 has been completely struck down. The judgment has not been challenged, and they have not come out with any new notification. Thirdly, they have only used the word mark-to-market loss or expected loss. They only deal with loss. They don't deal with expense. Now, we have a judgment of Supreme Court in case of T.A. Qureshi 287 ITR 547, where they have clearly drawn a line of difference between a loss and an expense. Only if it's a loss, you go to 36(1)(18) and 40A30. But if it's an expense, certainly you don't go to 36(1)(18). You will fall under section 37(1), and prudence concept is accepted under section 37. Just an example which comes readily in my mind is, if certain amount has been paid in advance which is not recoverable in future, at this stage you presume or you expect that this amount is not recoverable in future. It is a loss governed by section 36(1)(18) and 48. But take another example that you are expecting that in future you have to incur a particular expense or incur, or you have to spend something, or you have to, there will be an outflow of resources in future. That is not a loss. That can be termed as an expense, and therefore that should not be covered by section 36(1)(18). You can claim it as a provision of expense which is governed by ICDs 10, and you can take it as a deduction under section 37(1). So therefore, the important point here which I am trying to make is, try to distinguish between loss and expense. Expected losses are not allowed, certainly because of 36(1)(18), but expected expenses are allowed, and you can claim it as a deduction. What about other losses which are specifically governed by other sections like 36(1)(7) and 36(1)(8). If there are specific provisions allowing particular losses, then certainly 36(1)(18) does not apply and the ICDS cannot apply. In fact, ICDS cannot come in conflict with the provisions of the Act. Like loss, bad debts, or like provisions for bad and doubtful debt in case of banks. We have a specific provision 36(1)(7) and 8. So in such cases, since it is specifically allowed by the provisions of the Act, 36(1)(18) should not. Of course, what is not allowed is an expected loss. If it's an actual loss, you can certainly claim a deduction under section 28, and Supreme Court judgment in case of Badridas Saga will help. The other issue which will arise here is, okay, mark-to-market loss is not allowable, but your accounting standard requires you to even recognize mark-to-market gains. So are you supposed to offer mark-to-market gains to tax? 36(1)(18) only deals with losses or allowances. 48(13) also deals with the same. There's no specific provision in the Act dealing with mark-to-market gain or income. Of course, it's a notional gain, but they have fortunately clarified in reply to question number 8 of circular number 10 of 17 that mark-to-market loss and mark-to-market gain will be given same treatment, and therefore if loss is not allowed, gain cannot be taxed. Lastly, as I have already discussed, there is no disclosure requirement. Now, let me just spend 5 minutes on the disclosure requirements in your Form 3CD. Of course, I am not competent because I don't do tax audit, but still, let me just throw some light on that. You have para 13 dealing with your disclosure of accounting policies and accounting standards, etc. Para 13 para 13D, E, and F deals with disclosure under ICDS. Now, 13D deals with whether one is following ICDS or not. 13E deals with increase or decrease in profit, and 13F deals with the disclosure requirements as specifically prescribed in the ICDS. Now, insofar as ICDS 1 is concerned, as I have already stated, it has been quashed completely. Therefore, there will be no disclosure requirements in para 13F. 2. Para 13E, where you have to specify increase or decrease in profits because of ICDS 1. Again, because there is no ICDS 1 in picture, there is no requirement to disclose increase or decrease in profits because of ICDS 1. And lastly, if at all any adjustment is made because of section 36(1)(18) and 40A(13), that is because of the provisions of the Income Tax Act and not because of ICDS, and therefore there is no requirement to disclose anything insofar as ICDS 1 is concerned. On a safer side, one wants to take a conservative view. If one has taken prudence, one has followed prudence in the books of account and claimed expected loss while computing net profit, and which is added back because of ICDS 1, and this will lead to your increase in profit in the first year when you are not claiming it. And if there is an actual loss, you will claim loss for computing income in that year, which is not forming part of your books of account because in the books you have already booked the expected loss. Therefore, there will be decrease in income because of ICDS 1 in the subsequent year. What about the other aspects of ICDS 1 which are quashed? For example, one of the aspects was change in accounting policy only for a reasonable cost. Now, ICDS 1 has been completely quashed. What they have amended is insofar as your prudence concept is concerned. There is no amendment specified for change in accounting policy. In any case, change in accounting policy for a reasonable cost is something which is very well settled. We have lot many judgments, which has also been clarified in question number 9. Therefore, really does not make any difference. What about substance over form? They have specified you to follow substance over form. It was there in ICDS 1, completely quashed. They don't come out with an amendment. Can one say, since you have not specifically come out with any amendment in this regard, I can also follow form over substance and not substance over form? The answer may be negative because substance over form is something which is accepted by judicial precedents over a period of time, even before ICDS 1 was into picture, and therefore judicial precedents have to be followed by any person. Therefore, one has to follow substance over form. The concept of materiality was not present in ICDS 1, though it was present in the erstwhile AS 1 issued by CBDT and AS1 issued by ICAS. Also recognized by the courts insofar as the Income Tax Act is concerned. Since ICDS 1 is not there in statute book, materiality concept can be said to be alive and valid. We have already discussed para 13F disclosure requirements are not required because ICDS 1 is completely quashed. In any case, it only deals with accounting policies, and therefore you can write that normal disclosure in accounts, whatever is reported in your notes to accounts, is the same thing which you want to report here, nothing new. And what are one more disclosure requirement ICDS 1 is effect of change in the accounting method, which is already covered by para 13A to para 13C of the 3CD report. Therefore, nothing new to be specified. Lastly, ICDS 1 has been quashed, but really speaking, it had no material implication for computation of income because ICDS are not for the purpose of maintenance of books of accounts, whereas ICDS 1 completely dealt with accounting policies, which has something to say only for the purpose of maintenance, nothing to do with computation of income. If it is not there for preparation of financial statements, then one really fails to understand what was the real need of coming out with ICDS. Which ICDS would govern derivative instrument is one of the issue raised in circular number 10. And the board has clarified that ICDS 6 applies to the extent of derivative contracts in respect of foreign currency transactions. Apart from that, there is no specific ICDS dealing with derivative instruments. Therefore, ICDS 1 should apply. Now, we will discuss this in much detail when we discuss ICDS 8, which deals with securities. And if it is not covered by ICDS 2, ICDS 6, and ICDS 8, then it falls within the purview of ICDS 1 and 36(1)(18) should apply. Loss, mark-to-market loss should not be allowed. We come to the next ICDS, which is valuation of inventories.
Before he goes to ICDS 2, are there any questions on the introduction or ICDS 1? If anybody has any question, what did you say about that conservative addition in the first year and decrease in profit in the next year?
So if one wants to disclose in the 3CD report, I'll just give an example. I have booked some loss in year 1, which is an expected loss, because I follow prudence for maintaining books of accounts. Now, this loss is not allowable as per ICDS 1 and for section 36(1)(18). So in year 1, there will be increase in profits because of ICDS, which I have to disclose in para 13E. Now, this loss turns into an actual loss in year 3. So in year 3, insofar as my books of accounts are concerned, there will be no implication in my profit and loss account because I have already claimed an expected loss in year 1. But the actual loss would be taken as a deduction while computing my taxable income. So there will be decrease in the profits as compared to my books, and therefore in that year, one has to disclose in para 13E, which is decrease in profits because of ICDS. So in year 1, increase in profits, in year 2, decrease in profits. So of course, good question by Sharmaji, because here it brings out an important proposition that really speaking, ICDS will only have a timing difference. ICDS proposes to tax something in an earlier year and allow deduction in the subsequent, which is exactly reverse to the concept of prudence, where you claim expenses in the earlier years by being conservative and offer income only if there is virtual or reasonable certainty of receipt in subsequent. So there will only be a timing difference instead of year 1, year 3, or instead of year 3, year 1. So if there is any implication of ICDS and there is shifting of profit from year 3 to year 1 or shifting of expense from year 1 to year 3, there will be a disclosure requirement in para 13E for both the years. In 1 year, there will be an increase. In the second year, there will be a decrease.
Yeah, Ashok and Sanjay, Dharan said that because it is struck down ICDS 1, no, in fact, there is no requirement of disclosure. Practically, what is happening? I think practically for safer side, we are
disclosing.
disclosing.
Yeah, we are.
Yeah.
But
All
we are
of us.
disclosing to the extent we are saying that referred notes to accounts, correct?
Not necessary.
Yes.
More
Okay.
often than yes, refer the notes to accounts.
Notes to accounts.
और at times specific वो note निकाल के इधर भी डाल देते हैं.
Correct. वैसे भी ये सब ऑनलाइन हो गया है. Scope to make or scope to report is very limited, I think, in the online report, correct?
Yeah.
Because safer view is taken, right?
Of course.
Yeah.
There is no harm in reporting, but we can always take this view when we are stuck up in a bad position.
Bad position, right? I appreciate.
Okay,
Yeah, if
so I
there are
move forward.
Yeah.
Yes, so next ICDS is valuation of inventories. So firstly, the broad provisions of ICDS 2. It deals with how to compute your cost of inventory, what value it should be recorded, cost or NRV, whichever is lower, which methods to be followed, FIFO, LIFO, weighted average, etc. What are the components of cost, etc. is something which is specifically dealt with by ICDS 2. Exactly similar to your AS2, nothing new, except that they have inserted one or two provisions here and there to overcome the judgments of various high courts and Supreme Courts. When I come to ICDS 2 and the Delhi High Court judgment, what did the Delhi High Court say? Firstly, ICDS 2 has been completely struck down. It's not that it has been struck down in part, it has been completely struck down. Corresponding amendment in Form 3CD and any clarification in the circular is also struck down. Now, why? What are the reasons given by the Delhi High Court? Firstly, ICDS 2 specifies that for the purpose of valuing inventory in case of a partnership firm, which is under dissolution, whether the business is continued or discontinued, you please value it at net realizable value. Now, this, according to us, was directly contrary to the ruling of the Supreme Court in case of Shakti Trading Company reported in 250 ITR 871. So what is this controversy? If a firm has been dissolved and the business discontinues, the business comes to an end, then the courts have held that you record the inventory at closing stock because you have to determine the profits of the business. The profits of the business will be determined only if you record it as net realizable value. Don't recognize it as cost or NRV, whichever is lower, but record it at net realizable value. This was the view of Supreme Court in case of ALA firm. Subsequently, Supreme Court held that if the firm has dissolved, but the business has not discontinued, the remaining partners are continuing the business. In such case, don't record the stock at NRV, record the closing stock at cost or NRV, whichever is lower, because after selling the stock, profits would be earned by the new entity or the continued business, which would be then offered to tax. Therefore, there is no need to now recognize NRV. This was the view taken by Supreme Court in case of Shakti Trading. So, two views. If the firm has dissolved, business discontinued, then record at NRV. But if the firm has dissolved, business is still continuing, recorded cost or NRV, whichever is lower. And this view of Supreme Court in case of Shakti Trading was again reaffirmed by the Supreme Court in case of Quality Steel Supplier 395 ITR. ICDS says, no, whether partnership business continues or not, please value it at net realizable value. Delhi High Court said, to the extent of this para, it goes contrary to the decision of the Supreme Court in case of Shakti Trading. Secondly, we argued that at that stage, Section 145 was starting with, notwithstanding anything contained in Section 145 of the Act, the goods shall be valued in accordance with the method of accounting regularly employed by the assessor. So if I followed any particular method of accounting, which was regularly employed by me, it was a perfect method as per Section 145A. And 145A prevailed over Section 145. It is under 145 that they have notified ICDS 2. Really speaking, my regular method of accounting would therefore prevail over ICDS 2. As such, it had no meaning. Therefore, it was completely struck down in toto. Corresponding amendments in Form 3CD and clarification circular were also struck down. To overcome the decision of the Delhi High Court, they amended section 145A in completeness. Now they say that, please read the starting words, for the purpose of determining the income chargeable under the head profits and gains of business or profession. They have removed the word notwithstanding anything contained in section 145. So now this is not overriding section 145, but now they say, for the purpose of determining the income chargeable under the head profits and gains of business profession, valuation of inventory shall be made at lower of cost or NRV, computed in accordance with ICDS. And 2, valuation of purchase and sale of goods, services, and inventory shall be adjusted to include any amount of any duty, cess, fee, etc. Now, 145A clause 2 is something which was already there in the old 145. The implications of the amendments by the Finance Act 2018. Firstly, they have used the word inventory in section 145A, clause 1 and clause 2, but they have not defined the term inventory in the Income Tax Act. And I think it is for the first time that the word inventory has been used in the Income Tax Act. Therefore, what do you mean by the word inventory? Inventory is defined in ICDS 2. The section says that inventory means assets which are held for sale in the ordinary course of business, or in the process of production for such sale, or in the form of materials or supplies to be consumed in production process or in rendering of services. This is generally what inventory means. There is nothing new, and this definition should apply. However, ICDS 2 does not apply to some of the inventories like construction contract or like work in progress dealt with by other ICDS, shares, debentures, other financial instruments, producers inventories like livestock, agriculture, forest produce, mineral oil, etc., machinery, spares, etc. Though they may be inventory, but ICDS 2 does not apply. However, one can take a view that even these kind of inventories fall under section 145. Second controversy is, how do you value inventories as per new section 145A? Let us go back to 145A1. Valuation of inventory shall be made at lower of actual cost or NRV. Without any exception, you have to value your inventory at cost or market value, whichever is lower. When will I go to ICDS? Only to compute the cost or NRV, I will go to ICDS. Only for computation purpose, I will go to ICDS. Therefore, can there be a situation where ICDS specifies, no, this kind of inventory, you value it at cost. This kind of inventory, you value it at NRV. The answer is no. Job or the role of ICDS is to specify how to compute cost and how to compute NRV. It cannot specify. In such situation, you value it at cost, and in such situation, you value it at NRV. Two, para 16 of ICDS 2 says that you have to follow FIFO or weighted average method. Earlier, we had judgments of the tribunals and high courts to the effect that one can also follow LIFO. Now, since para 16 specifically says FIFO and weighted average, it is supposed to apply to all category of assessees. Now, the answer to this question is twofold. Firstly, one can take a view that ICDS 2 has been quashed. There is no new notification, and therefore ICDS really does not exist in the eyes of law. And therefore, I can value it at LIFO also, because there is no specific negation in this test. Two, one can take a view that one has to follow FIFO and weighted average, because para 16 says so. Now, again, one can also take a view that if there are judgments to the effect that I can follow LIFO, then that judgment has to prevail over ICDS, and ICDS cannot say that you have to only follow FIFO and weighted average. So it is quite possible, quite a contentious issue. On a safer side, one has to follow FIFO and weighted average, but if one follows, and of course, for the maintenance of books of accounts also, one has to follow FIFO and weighted average, therefore doesn't make really any difference. Now, as we have already dealt with the issue that 145A requires you to value your inventory at cost or market value, whichever is lower, without any exception. Therefore, even if there is a dissolution of firm, even if the business is discontinued, still you have to value inventory at cost or NRV, whichever is lower, because that is what 145A subclause or clause 1 says. So there is no exception that in case of a partnership firm which has dissolved, business discontinued, please value it at NRV, because ICDS 2.1 it has been cost even without prejudice to the same. ICDS 2 cannot say in which situation you have to value it at cost or NRV, whichever is lower, and in which situation you have to value it at NRV. Job of ICDS 2 is to only specify how to compute cost, how to compute NRV. To this extent, Shakti Trading judgment has been upheld and ALA firm has been overruled. One has to follow or value closing stocks in case of dissolution of a partnership firm, irrespective of continuation or discontinuance of the business, at cost or NRV, whichever is lower. Now, one silent amendment has been made in 145A to overcome the Bombay High Court judgment. Earlier, purchase, sale of goods and inventories were to be adjusted with the amount of tax duty cess. Insofar as services are concerned, we have court rulings to the effect that 145A does not require services to also be adjusted with the cost or the service tax or the GST amount, and therefore there is no question of adding service tax to the credit side of the P&L. So the impact of this would be, if you don't pay service tax to the due date of filing of return of income, you are supposed to be disallowed under section 43B. Now they have silently amended section 145A. Now they write that you have to value your purchase, sale of goods or services and inventory, and the same shall be adjusted to include the amount of any tax, duty, cess or fee. Therefore, judgment of the Bombay High Court in case of Knight Frank India Limited has been specifically overruled. Now, there is one para in ICDS, which is para 22, which deals with valuation of opening inventory. Now, as we have already discussed that inventory term has not been defined, but inventory is to be valued at cost or market value, whichever is lower. Therefore, inventory has to be specifically understood as closing inventory and not opening inventory. If that is the case, then para 22 of ICDS 2, assuming it to be existing, should not be a valid para, because there is no provision or power given to the CBDT to notify how to value opening inventory, and therefore para 22 as such is not relevant or not binding. Now, what in any case does para 22 say? Now, there was this controversy which used to happen. What used to happen was, if I changed the method of valuation of closing stock, the department argued that no, then you have to apply the same method to opening stock as well. You change closing and change opening as well. Bombay High Court in case of Melmult Corporation held that if there is a change in method of valuation of closing stock in a particular year, there is bound to be a different valuation method for opening stock and a different valuation method for closing stock, because opening stock means the closing stock of the previous. You don't have to change the method for valuation of your opening stock as well. Now, this judgment has been specifically approved by para 22 of ICDS 2, which says that cost of inventory on the day, value of inventory as on the beginning of the previous year shall be value of inventory as on the close of the immediately preceding previous, which means closing stock of last year will be opening stock of this year, irrespective whether you change the method of accounting. Only one sub-para of para 22 may cause a little problem when there is conversion of capital asset into stock in trade. What happens when you start a business by converting capital asset into stock in trade? Section 45(2) will apply, which means as on the date of conversion, you have to determine the fair market value. The difference between the fair market value and the original cost is your capital gains. And this fair market value will be taken as cost to the business. And thereafter, you will compute the profits by reducing the sale, by reducing this cost from the sale price. This is what has been held by the Supreme Court in case of By Shirin by Kuka and Grossbecker. Now, para 22 sub-para 1 says that the value of inventory as on the beginning of the previous year shall be cost of inventory available, if any, on the day of the commencement of the business when the business has commenced during the previous. So in a case where you convert a capital asset into stock in trade and commence a new business, as per para 22.1, cost of the inventory shall be the cost which shall be allowable, whereas judgments require fair market value. Of course, we have already discussed that judgments have to prevail over the provisions of ICDS 1 and 2. In any case, it has to be the fair market value, because difference between the fair market value and actual cost is already getting taxed under the head capital gains. There cannot be double taxation of the very same income. In case of a person following cash system of accounting, how do they value inventory? ICDS is not applicable. Therefore, they may choose not to follow ICDS, and as a result, they may choose to follow LIFO instead of FIFO. Of course, in case of cash system, the courts have held that you have to value inventory, because ultimately valuation of inventory is for determining the profits of a particular period. That has been held by Supreme Court in case of Chainroop Sampatram 24 ITR, where the Supreme Court says, "Boss, why are you valuing inventory? Is because you only come to a net figure of profit of the goods sold in a particular year. Inventory cannot lead to any profit or cannot lead to any income. You just exclude the opening and closing. Therefore, you get a particular figure of profit of the particular year. Therefore, even in case of cash system, you have to value your inventory opening and closing. And for that purpose, ICDS do not apply, and therefore can follow FIFO or LIFO, whichever is convenient to you. Disclosure, as I have already specified, disclosure is not required because ICDS 2 has been quashed. In any case, there shall not be any impact on the total income because of ICDS 2, because it's similar to your AS2. Further, insofar as para 13F is concerned, where you have to make disclosures as per ICDS 2, these are the same disclosure requirements as per AS2, except that there are certain disclosure requirements insofar as standard costing is concerned in case of concerns who are into manufacturing of goods. So to that extent, there is a deviation. One has to refer, or one has to disclose the standard costing, the measurement of cost, details of inventories, and a confirmation of the fact that standard cost approximates the actual cost. To this extent, one has to disclose certain extra items in para 13F of form 3CD report. So I am done with ICDS 2. And if there are no questions, I'll jump to ICDS 3.
There is one question. 1 second. Yeah, it's from Mr. Vidyadhar Somani. 145A ICDS 2 and ICA guideline note on no impact on valuation of sale, purchase, and inventories after adjustment of taxes. 145A is interpreted that sales and purchases are to be valued inclusive method. Your view is appreciated.
Yes. So the new section 145A does not deviate from the earlier section. It specifies the same thing, that you have to follow inclusive method of accounting. And our ICI has taken a view that whether you follow inclusive or exclusive method of accounting, there should not be any impact on your income. And they also specified the method. We had a very detailed discussion in one of the ISG organized by Direct Tax Committee, I think two years back, where I had discussed on this aspect, the computation mechanism of under inclusive method and exclusive method. We have two judgments to help the assessees on this. One is, of course, the Chainroop Sampatram 24 ITR, which says that one cannot earn any profit from valuation of inventories. Same should apply here. And two, there is a Bombay High Court judgment in case of Diamond Dichem, wherein the court has, after section 145, held that irrespective of the method of accounting, exclusive, inclusive, there shall be no implications on the taxable income. So that one can refer to.
And in guidance note on also the detailed example is given.
Yes. Generally, what the department does is it adds the SENVAT credit balance available at the end of the year to the closing stock, which actually is not a correct treatment. The correct treatment is prescribed in the example given in the guidance note. What has to be added to your credit side and what has to be added to your debit side, the ultimate effect would be 0. Okay, so I'll proceed with ICDS 3, which deals with construction
think-
contract. Yes.
Mr. Vidyadhar wants to. Can we unmute him? He wants to. He has raised the hand. Ashok, Sanjay, can we unmute him?
Just a second, I'll try and do it, sir.
Deepesh,
Yeah, I don't find him.
Hello.
Hello. Yeah.
No, he has not raised his hand.
Okay. No, he has raised it. Has
He
raised it.
lowered his hand.
Okay, okay. Then we can move.
Yes. So we go to the next ICDS, which is construction contract, ICDS 3. Now, ICDS 3, the brief background about ICDS 3, it is similar to AS 7. Nothing new, nothing more, nothing less. A specifically defined construction contract. ICDS 3 only applies for determination of income of from a construction contract of a contractor. Only of a contractor. Construction contract has been defined, which means construction of an asset or a combination of assets which are closely related to each other. You have a fixed price contract and a cost plus contract which has been defined. Then you have to follow percentage completion method. You don't have any other method as per ICDS 3. How to determine the cost, how to determine the stage of completion, how to determine the contract revenue is something which has been specified in ICDS 3, and the disclosure requirements are there. Now, this was challenged before the Delhi High Court on 2 grounds, or rather 3 grounds. The first ground was dealing with retention money. Now, firstly, this ICDS has not been completely struck down. Only some of the parts have been struck down. Firstly, ICDS 3 held that your contract revenue shall include retention money, and you have to apply percentage completion method. And that percentage completion method, by applying percentage completion method, you have to apply that percentage of the stage of completion to your contract revenue, including retention money. And therefore, to that extent, retention money was getting taxed at an earlier stage. Whereas there were judgments to the effect that retention money cannot be taxed at an earlier stage, because retention money is something which one receives only after the client is satisfied with the construction made. It's something which is retained by a client after the completion of contract, and he will pay me only if he's satisfied, there are no complaints, nothing, etc. So really speaking, at the completion of contract or at an earlier stage, there is no reasonable certainty of receipt. 1, there is no right to receive by the person, and 3, there is no corresponding liability on the other party to pay. As a result, the courts had held that retention money cannot be taxed till the time other party acknowledges such payment. Only at that point of time it can be taxed. But now the ICDS wants retention money to be taxed as per the percentage completion method, and therefore, to this extent, court held that it is going to the contrary to the settled position of law. To that extent, it was quashed and set aside. 2, while determining the contract cost, one has to add the borrowing costs and one has to reduce the incidental income. ICDS 3 para 12 states that you reduce the incidental income except interest, dividend, and capital gain. So, for example, if I am constructing a bridge and temporarily I have some accommodation which is being used by my employees and they pay me rent, such a rent is an incidental income which can be reduced from the construction cost. But if I have received certain interest income or dividend income or capital gain, it cannot be reduced from my contract cost, it has to be taxed separately. This, the Delhi High Court held that it is running contrary to the Supreme Court judgment in case of Bokaro Steel 236 ITR, and to this extent it was set aside. Lastly, and most importantly, while dealing with ICDS 4, which should equally apply for ICDS 3, they only allow us to follow one method of accounting, which is percentage completion method or proportionate completion method. Whereas we have earlier court rulings, including Supreme Court in case of Bilahari Investment and Delhi High Court rulings, which have allowed us to follow even the project completion method. They say that you are altering the method of accounting, which you cannot do by way of notification, and therefore, to that extent, when you say only one method of accounting is to be followed, the same was squashed and set aside by the Delhi High Court. Corresponding amendment in Form 3CD was struck down and clarification also. To overcome this, they came out with a new section, Section 43CB of the Income Tax Act, which applies to construction contract and service contract. Now, please see what they write. Profits and gains arising from a construction contract or a contract for providing services shall be determined on the basis of percentage completion method in accordance with ICDS notified. Now, here one will find that the word computed in accordance, computed is absent, which means our interpretation of the word computed for the other sections is correct and supported by Section 43CB. Wherever the legislature felt computed word should be used, they have used. Some places they have not used, and one has to give meaning to each and every word which has been incorporated in the act by the legislature. So, okay, 43CB1 says that please follow construction percentage completion method in accordance with ICDS while you're computing your profits and gains arising from a construction contract. Subsection 2 says that contract revenue shall include retention money. Contract cost shall not be reduced by any incidental income in the nature of interest, dividends, or capital gain. So all three propositions or all three findings of Delhi High Court specifically dealt with by this amendment in Section 43CB. What are the issues arising of ICDS 3? Firstly, what do you mean by the word construction contract? Because it is not defined anywhere in the Act. Construction contract, though it is defined by ICDS 3, should I take the meaning of ICDS 3 for determining the meaning of the word construction contract under the Act? Of course, the answer would be no, because you cannot use notification to interpret a word under the Act. But since there is only one ICDS which deals with construction contract, you are left with no option but to go to ICDS 3 to interpret the word construction contract. Really speaking, the controversy here is whether real estate builders are covered under 43CB, and therefore whether a real estate builder is mandatorily required to follow only percentage completion method. The answer to this, in my humble opinion, is no. 43CB only covers construction contract. Construction contract as per ICDS 3 is construction of an asset by following fixed cost method or cost plus method or fixed remuneration method. The real estate contract is different from a construction contract. In real estate contract, my sales are contingent upon future sale of the units. If you cannot accord same treatment, you cannot ask me to follow percentage completion. 2. Para 1 of ICDS 3 only deals with income of contractor, and therefore it should not apply to real estate contract. And lastly, in reply to question number 12 of Circular 10, the board itself has clarified that at present there is no ICDS which is dealing with real estate builders. In effect, 43CB does not apply to real estate builders, and therefore even a real estate builder can follow a project completion method. In fact, in one of our case, which was going before the Faceless Assessment Center, a same issue was raised, and we had argued that no, was ICDS does not apply, 43CB does not apply, and fortunately for the SSC, they accepted. So yes, it does not apply to a real estate builder. As per AS7, also you are required to follow percentage completion. Here also you are required to follow percentage completion. Therefore, ideally, there should not be any MAT implication because of the method of accounting. Coming to the third aspect, how to tax retention money. Delhi High Court says, there are court decision which says, no, you tax retention money only when there is corresponding liability on the other party to pay. This has also been certified by the Delhi High Court. But now they have come out with an amendment 43CB21, which says contract revenue shall include the retention money to compute as per the percentage completion method in accordance with ICDS 3, Section 36(1)(18) and Section 40 capital A 13 specifies that expected losses are not to be allowed. 4. Therefore, according to me, you have to tax retention money in accordance with the method of accounting you regularly employ, which is the percentage completion method in accordance with ICDS 3, and therefore all the judgments are therefore overruled. Only saving grace is contract revenue to be recognized only if there is reasonable certainty of ultimate collection. If you feel there is no reasonable certainty, then you can defer the recognition of such retention money. Now, there is one controversy which may arise here, since 43CB refers to ICDS 3 and ICDS 3 is under section 145. Can one say that 43CB read with 145 and ICDS 3 cannot override section 5? Because under section 5 we have judgments that an income can be taxed only if it's a real income, that is, you have a right to receive that income and corresponding liability on the other party to pay. Insofar as the retention money is concerned, there is no corresponding liability on the other party to pay. Therefore, income does not accrue under section 5. Therefore, 43CB read with ICDS 3 read with 145 should not apply, because ICDS 3, 145 and 43CB are machinery provisions and section 5 should prevail. One can take a view, take a chance. I only worry about section 5 starting with not subject to provisions of this act, and subject to provisions of this act should also include section 43CB, which specifically tax contract revenue as one including retention money. But on the other hand, one can say that it only includes retention money provided it accrues. If it does not accrue, then contract revenue should not include retention money. This can be a counter argument. So yes, worth taking a chance. If one wants to tax retention money as per ICDS 3, then there shall be no disclosure requirement, because retention money is also supposed to be offered to your profit and loss account in the same manner as ICDS 3, and therefore there shall not be any increase or decrease in profit due to ICDS 2. Taxing of retention money is also because of the provisions of the section and not because of ICDS, and therefore there is no need to disclose it in ICDS in para 13E of form 3CD report. Expected losses can be taken as allowed. This controversy was dealt with by the Delhi High Court in the form of concept of prudence, where they had specifically referred to the Gujarat and Delhi High Court judgment, where the courts had allowed expected loss from a contract while computing income of the assessee. So, for example, if I am doing a construction contract which is for a period of 5 years, in year 3 I anticipate, no boss, I am going to suffer a loss in this contract. Then I have to book that loss in year 3 itself, as per the concept of prudence. Now, can one take expected loss even under new section 43CB read with ICDS 3? The answer is, in my humble opinion, no, because of course there is no specific amendment in 43CB, but 43CB says once it is a construction contract, offer income as per ICDS 3, contract revenue, contract cost as per the stage of completion, difference is income or loss. Don't book a future loss. That comes as a natural analogy or natural corollary to the percentage completion method. 2. Section 36(1)(18) and section 48(13) specifically says expected losses to be allowed only if it is allowed as per ICDS, and ICDS does not allow you to book expected losses from a construction contract. As a result of this, you will not be able to claim expected losses in the year in which you expect the losses are going to be incurred in future year, in contrast to the provision treatment in the books of account. Therefore, in year 3, in my example, there will be increase in profit because of ICDS, and there will be decrease in profit in the year in which actual loss, the loss is actually incurred. Lastly, incidental income can be reduced from contract cost. Yes, but not if it is in the nature of interest, dividend, and capital gain. To this extent, there will be a disclosure requirement in para 13E of your 3CD report. If interest, dividend, or capital gain is offered to tax by an assessee under the head income from other sources, in such case, you are not required to show increase in profits in para 13E, because para 13 deals with your profits and gains of business or profession. Therefore, if these incomes are to be taxed under the head IFOS, no disclosure requirements in 13E. But if the business income is offered to, if the interest income is offered to tax under the head business income being incidental to your main business, then in such case, you will have to show increase in profits in para 13. The other disclosure requirements are same as AS7, and therefore you can write in para 13F that please refer to notes to accounts. This is insofar as ICDS 3 is concerned. Do you have any questions on ICDS 3?
If you could look at the question answer boxes, there's some queries on inventory which have been received later on.
Okay.
If you could answer this.
There is one question in the chat box whether support of Berger Paints and Indian Nippon can be taken for closing stock valuation as per section 145. Yes, these judgments were in fact referred to in the Bombay High Court judgment in Diamond Dichem, and therefore certainly support can be taken. The other issues, what will be the impact on change in constitution of the firm in the valuation of inventory? Nothing. You have to value it at cost or market value, whichever is low. Mere change in constitution of the firm does not mean there is discontinuation of the business, and therefore there should not be any impact. Berger Paint, Indian Nippon already answered. Vidyadhar Somani has posted one question. 145, where my opening and closing inventory is consist of duty paid and duty free import goods which cannot be identified on valuation. And para 5 of us, it says that cost of purchase shall consist of taxes which has been paid is available for set of ITCs. In this issue, can we conclude that no impact on inventory? Yes, I think we have already discussed there is no impact on the inventory. Incidental income by way of sale of scrap gunny bag can be reduced from WIP. Yes, it can be reduced. Section 43 CV specifically allows. Okay. Can I move forward?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. So now we go to the next aspect of ICDS 4, which is revenue recognition. So what does ICDS 4 say? ICDS 4 says that from sale of goods, from sale of or rendering of services, when should you recognize revenue? Is what ICDS 4 says. Now, in my humble understanding, this means when should I offer income to tax? Now, that is specifically for which purpose the Income Tax Act is enacted. There are various provisions starting from section 224 for charging section, other deeming section, which says when does your income accrue or arise and when it has to be offered to tax. Really speaking, ICDS 4 had nothing to, had no role to play because there are specific provisions in the Act, and since the Act has to prevail over the ICDS 4, for ICDS 4 as such has very less, binding value. Insofar as ICDS 4 is concerned, the Delhi High Court gave 3 findings. Now, the Supreme Court in case of Excel Industries held that if there's a duty drawback or an export incentive which I am supposed to receive, then in such cases what happens is I make a claim to the government for duty drawback, and the government accepts the claim and then provides for duty drawback or provides me the incentive. Department wanted to tax the export incentive in the year in which I make a claim. Supreme Court said no, it can be taxed only in the year in which the government accepts the claim, because it is in this year that a corresponding obligation to pay arises in the hands of the government. This was tried to done away with by para 5 of ICDS 4, which stated that please recognize export incentives in the year in which there is a reasonable certainty of ultimate collection. So in year 1, when you make an application for government incentives or the export incentive or duty drawback, and if there is a reasonable certainty of collection, offer it to tax irrespective of the fact that such claim is accepted by the government. This was running contrary to the Supreme Court judgment in case of Excel Industries. To this extent, para 5 was struck down by the Delhi High Court. Secondly, we have already discussed for recognizing income from service contracts, ICDS 4 only permitted percentage completion method, which was running contrary to various judgments of the High Court and Supreme Court. To that extent, that is, if they only allow one method, that portion of the ICDS was struck down. However, one portion of the ICDS was specifically upheld by the Delhi High Court, which is interest is required to be taxed on time basis or accrual basis, which is the outstanding amount into the rate of interest into the period for which the interest accrues. You don't have to look into reasonable certainty of interest receipt. And as a result, even if the receipt of interest is not reasonably certain, you had to offer it to tax. Now, this was, according to us, contrary to the various Supreme Court rulings and the rulings of the High Court. But they justified such action on the ground that we are going to give you your claim for bad debts. We have amended section 36(1)(7) on making of provisions will allow you, or on not making of provisions, on justifying why such interest is bad debts will allow you bad debts under section 36(1)(7). And since we had not challenged the proviso to section 36(1)(7), Delhi High Court held that even if there is no reasonable certainty, interest income has to be taxed on accrual basis, that is the outstanding amount into the rate of interest into the period for which interest is accrued. To this extent, ICDS 4, para 8(1) of ICDS 4 was upheld by the Delhi High Court. Accordingly, para 5 and 6 struck down. Corresponding amendments in form 3CD also struck down. What is the amendment which has been brought out by the Finance Act 18? Firstly, we have already seen section 43 CB. It says profits and gain arising from a construction contract or a contract for providing services shall be determined on the basis of percentage completion method in accordance with ICDS notified. Please look at the proviso. Provided that profits and gains arising from a contract for providing services, the duration of not more than 90 days shall be determined on the basis of project completion method, and involving indeterminate number of acts over a period of time shall be determined on the basis of straight line method. So, if it's a contract for less than 90 days, please follow project completion. If it involves indeterminate number of acts, but a contract for a particular period, you may follow straight line method. For example, in case of your regular AMC, the acts are indeterminate. You may at any point of time call your engineer to check your computer, etc. Therefore, they can recognize the AMC value over a period of the term of AMC, straight line method. Also, to overcome the ruling of the Delhi High Court qua the export incentive portion, they have amended section 145 subsection 2, and they say that claim for escalation of price in a contract or export incentive shall be deemed to be the income of the previous year in which reasonable certainty of its realization is achieved. Now let us come to some of the controversies in ICDS 4. Firstly, ICDS 4 recognizes the concept of uncertainty and ultimate collection. One of the criteria, if the ultimate collection of income is uncertain, don't recognize it. This was also held by various judgments of the Supreme Court, especially the judgment in case of Excel Industries. To that extent, a revenue recognition has to be postponed. But this principle will not apply when you have to recognize revenue from your interest income, because that portion, para 5(1), has been specifically upheld by the Delhi High Court. So even if there is no reasonable certainty, you have to recognize interest income based on the accrual system of accounting. How to overcome this? My suggestion would be, in such cases, please recognize interest income in your credit side of P&L account and simultaneously make a provision for bad debts or claim bad debts in respect of such interest income. This will enable you to claim bad debts under section 36(1)(7) read with second proviso, and therefore there shall not be any implication on the taxation of interest income. Otherwise, what will happen? If you offer it to tax as interest income and you want to claim it as bad debts, you have to prove it to the officer that the interest income has become bad, which takes us back to those years prior to judgment of Supreme Court in case of TRF, prior to the amendment. Earlier under section 36(1)(7), one had to prove the debt has become bad. Then they made an amendment. They say, no. Once you write it off, that is sufficient. We will not go into your justification. Now, for the purpose of ICDS, they again went back to the old provision. This is because under the books of accounts, you will not recognize interest income. If you don't recognize interest income, you will simultaneously not claim any bad debts, or you will not write it off. If you don't write it off in your books of accounts, there is no question of allowability of any bad debts under section 3617, and therefore you are given a benefit. Even if you don't write it off, if you prove that your income has been offered to tax as per ICDS, but it has really turned bad, you will be allowed deduct. Therefore, my suggestion would be that, offer it and simultaneously claim bad debts. Even if you are offering it under the head income from other sources, still one can claim bad debts as a loss under section 56 by relying upon the Supreme Court judgment in case of Badridas Khan. The implications of this are, since in the books interest is not recognized, as per ICDS it is required to be disclosed, you have to show as increase in the profit in your para 13E. Second controversy is regarding the method of accounting to be followed for service contracts. If the duration of contract is more than 90 days, mandatorily follow percentage completion method. You cannot follow project completion. But if your duration of contract is less than 90 days, you have to mandatorily follow project completion method. You don't have the option to follow percentage completion. Now, if you contrast the wordings of 43 CB with ICDS 4, you will realize that in ICDS 4, if the duration of contract was less than 90 days, assessee had an option of either following percentage completion or project completion. But under section 43 CB subsection 1 proviso, you don't have an option. If the duration is less than 90 days, mandatorily follow project completion method. This may give rise to MAT implication. Of course, contracts involving indeterminate number of acts, please follow straight line methods. What are the disclosure requirements insofar as this is concerned? If for your normal books of accounts, if you follow project completion method, for the purpose of computing income under the Income Tax Act, if you follow percentage completion method, then in your books of accounts, profits will be offered after the completion of services, whereas for the purpose of income tax, profits will be offered scattered over a period of 5 years, period of contract, which may be 5 years, 6 years, whatever it is. Initial years, there will be increase in profits as compared to books of accounts, and the last year there will be decrease in profit, because in your books of accounts you will offer the entire profits of the contract in your profit and loss accounts, whereas under the Income Tax Act you will only offer that portion of the profits relatable to that, to the last. So in the initial year, increase in profit, last year decrease in profit. Expected loss from service contract not attributable to stage of completion can be recognized as soon as detected. As we have already discussed in ICDS 3, expected loss cannot be recognized because you have to follow ICDS 4 percentage completion method. Only profit or loss to the extent of stage of completion can be recognized. Losses of future stages cannot be recognized because it's an expected loss not allowed under ICDS, and therefore cannot be claimed under section 36(1)(18) as well as 48. Ability to measure revenue accurately was one of the conditions in AS9, but it is not a condition in ICDS 4. Therefore, even if you're not able to measure your revenue accurately, you have to still recognize it as income. There is another controversy in respect of interest income. If you're a holder of a bond, the due date of interest of which is 31st December and 30th June. So from 1st January to 31st of March, 3 months interest accrue to you but does not become due. Supreme Court in ED Sassoon and the Bombay and Karnataka High Court in various cases have held that income which accrues but which is not due cannot be taxed. It can be taxed only when it becomes due. So income for 3 months, January, February, March, is ideally should be offered to tax on 30th June. But ICDS 4 requires you to tax it on the basis of accrual, not on the basis of when it becomes due. One, it is running contrary to the judgments. Two, judgments are in context of section 5, and section 145 is a machinery provision, cannot override section 5. Therefore, in my humble view, you can still recognize the income for the broken period only when it becomes due. That is income for the period of January, February, March, not as on 31st March, but when it becomes due, that is 30th June. Taking this example forward, suppose if the person transfers the security on 30th of April. Now, how to give treatment to the sale consideration received on sale of such security? Because such sale consideration will be inclusive of the sale consideration of security plus interest for the period of 4 months, January, February, March up to 30th April. There are judgments to the effect that entire amount of sale consideration has to be offered to tax as capital gains. You cannot break up the consideration, take 4 months interest as income from other sources and balance as capital gains. But now ICDS requires you, if one follows that, to offer your interest income on accrual basis. Therefore, if one follows ICDS 4, you have to offer interest income for January, February, March as on 31st March, and for the month of April as on 30th of April. If that be the case, then such amount of interest is also included in the sale consideration. There is a possibility it may get taxed twice. Therefore, this was a question posed to CBDT. CBDT held that no. Once you offer it to tax, as per the accrual system, you have to reduce such interest while calculating capital gains. Certainly, this clarification is going against the provisions of the Act and the judgment. Should not have any impact, but since it is a beneficial clarification, one may take benefit of such clarification. Taxation of export incentives. Supreme Court says only when the government accepts a claim, but now section 145B2 says year in which there is a reasonable certainty of receipt, irrespective of the fact whether the government has accepted the claim or not. Question whether 145B2 should prevail over section 5 because 145B2 is in the chapter 14 procedure for assessment, same chapter as section 145, and 145 has been held to be a machinery provision, and 145 is subject to provisions of section 5 should prevail. Can one take an argument that even 145B should be subject to section 5, and since no income has accrued, therefore this export incentives cannot be taxed under 145B2? The answer may be no, because then section 145(2) is really speaking becoming odious, and that should not be the interpretation. What if one follows cash system of accounting? In that case, it has to be taxed in the year of receipt, irrespective of section 145B2. But if you look at 145B2, it does not distinguish between a person following cash or mercantile system of accounting. Therefore, it appears that even in case of a person following cash system of accounting, you have to offer income from export incentives in the year in which there is a reasonable certainty of its receipt, irrespective of the fact that it is received or not. Now, this brings to me to an important point, that the amendments which they have brought out in the Act by Finance Act 18 also applies to people who are not bound by ICDS. So this is a bigger controversy which I will deal with at the later part of the presentation. Lastly, if you are offering export incentive to tax because of the section 145B2, no disclosure requirement in para 13E, because this increase in profit is because of 145B2 and not because of the ICDS. The finance lease taxability, of course, a little bit academic. There is no separate ICDS dealing with leases. As per ICDS 4, sale of goods, revenue to be recognized, and significant risk and rewards are transferred. In finance lease, same thing happens. But if one sees substance over form, and the transaction may amount to finance lease, it is not a sale of goods, but it is actually a loan transaction. What should one follow? According to me, one has to follow substance over form. If it's a loan transaction, has to be recognized as loan transaction. Disclosure requirement, as compared to AS9, there are substantial disclosure requirements in para 13F, mainly to deal with sale of goods and services. Insofar as services are concerned, The disclosure requirements of ICDS 4 are similar to ICDS 3 because they have to disclose the stage of completion, what method selected, contract revenue, retention money, etc. Same disclosure. Now, there was a specific question asked: what if a person follows presumptive taxation section 144 AD, AE, ADA? Is he still supposed to follow ICDS? The answer is yes, as well as no. Now, revenue recognition ICDS 4 defines the term revenue as gross inflow of cash or receivable. Gross inflow. What is taxable under 44 AD, AE, ADA, B, BB, BBA is also the gross inflow and a percentage of such gross inflow. How to recognize gross inflow is something which ICDS 4 says. Therefore, to those assessees to whom 44 AD are applicable, you have to apply ICDS 4 to determine the gross inflow receipts and to compute a percentage of that and offer it to tax. But in case of an individual HUF who are not required to get books of accounts audited, to those people, ICDS are not applicable and therefore they are not supposed to follow ICDS to determine the gross inflow. Though mostly this question is academic because even otherwise you follow the same method as given in ICDS, that is in case of sale of goods when there is substantial transfer of risk or reward or transfer of ownership. In case of services, when the services are rendered to offer it to tax. That is a percentage completion method, etc. Lastly, a question was asked to board as to if I offer any particular income on gross basis like interest, royalty, 50s under section 115A, whether I'm still supposed to follow ICDS. They say yes, you are supposed to follow ICDS. One may choose not to follow ICDS, but since ICDS is applicable to all category of assessee who follow cash or mercantile system of accounting, less chances to succeed. You are required to follow ICDS and therefore apply the compute the gross interest and then offer it to tax under 115. Export license received to be offered tax when the same are sold or to be offered as closing stock on estimates. No, export license to be offered when the same are sold. It cannot be treated as your inventory according to me. Therefore, should be offered only in the year in which same are sold. And if such export license has a particular time limit, then there is no certainty you will transfer it. Therefore, there is no question of recognizing as any income on that. Correct, no, Ashok bhai? Any
Yeah.
export incentives? I'm not very sure what are the export incentives and how do they account for it, but they should ideally be the situation.
Yeah, so it is actually when it is received. So while making an application, there is no need to recognize it.
Correct.
When they actually you get a letter from them saying that now you are entitled to this particular credit or the amount gets credited to you, that point of time you need to recognize.
Correct. I agree. Now, of course, it is subject to 145B2, which is reasonable.
No, but that is the question. So you have not sold it, but there is a certainty that you are going to receive it.
No,
then you have to account for it.
Yeah, so when you receive it, you have to account for it.
So what are the categories of export incentives? Firstly,
so it could be MIES, you could be having duty drawback, DEPB, and one recent agriculture based incentive is also there. Licenses are also there. Then there are some specific product based licenses given for certain products, So these are the types of export incentives which are there.
So in case of export incentives, once I make an export, I am entitled to some incentive. I have to make an application to the government and they will issue me a certificate, correct?
Yes.
This certificate I can use for my own imports or I can transfer it to a third party.
Yes, that is true.
Correct. And this export import certificate would have some time limit that you have to import within 1 year or 2 years.
Some of them have. So an MIES would have a 2 year or 3 year limit depending on the product.
Okay.
Some of them would have a time limit.
So I can transfer it at any point of time.
Yes, you can.
Okay. So I don't think so you have to offer it to tax in the year in which you receive the certificate because really no income is received. Only if you transfer it to somebody, then income arises because that is where the real income arises. And Two, if you use it for your own business, of course, the cost will be adjusted in your profit and loss account, and therefore no need to separately recognize it. Only in case where you receive some money back from government in the nature of export incentive, that has to be offered to tax once you make an application and there is a reasonable certainty of receipt.
Dharan, what
Uh,
in what
Your
we are
voice is
doing?
now very low, Ashok bhai.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes.
So what we are doing in our case is
Hmm.
that we recognize it when we receive the certificates, because those are now in your hands and there is no uncertainty about the receipt of that incentive. So say supposing I have exported something worth 100 bucks and I get 3 rupees worth of MIES. Now when I get the 3 rupees worth of MIES, we account for it and we pay the tax. When we sell it, either it is at loss or at a profit. If it is a loss, we recognize that loss. If it is a profit, we recognize the profit. See, the problem is that if you don't recognize it till you sell it, then the criteria is what you do with that license is something different. So it is a later rate. You have received that incentive as when the certificate is issued. So that was I think there is a clarification issued even by the ICAI with regard to these incentives. We were following this accounting system of taxation.
But tell me one thing. Suppose I receive some goods free of cost, and assuming it is not taxable under 56(2)(10).
Yes.
Okay. Now, merely because I receive some goods free of cost, should I offer the net realizable value to tax till the time the goods are sold?
No, so it is not. The criteria is that this is not free of cost. There is a value put on that MIES when the government gives it to you, a percentage of the export or whatever. So that is already the value is put on that MIES. So it is, say supposing you get an MIES license, so 3% of 100 rupees, 3 rupees is the value put on the MIES. So yes, I agree that some of the guys are following this method that ultimately when you sell it, you recognize it. But in our firm, we've been recognizing it as and when we actually receive it, because the connection ends over there. The step towards selling the MIES is a secondary step. That was the understanding.
Okay. Okay. I don't see any problem in both the method of accounting. The one which you follow, offer it to tax, of course, department is not going to challenge that because you're offering it to tax. And subsequently, whatever is the fate, you accept that. And two, where you offer it to tax only when you sell it or when you use it in your own business. So that is actually when you receive the benefit. Till that time, it is merely on paper, according to me.
Okay, we'll take up the
next
next
question is
question.
Professional firms following mercantile method. Firm accepts contract to complete within 90 days, but is completed after 90 days. Implications as per 43 CV. So 1 second, I will just refer to section 43 CV. The wordings are from a contract for providing services with a duration of more than 90 days. Now, since it has already taken more than 90 days, therefore you have to follow percentage completion method. So that criteria of 43 CB is not the proposed completion date, but it is the actual completion date or the actual duration. If it has taken more than 90 days, then you have to follow percentage completion. With the sale of fixed assets forms part of block of asset. No, ICDS 4 is not applicable for sale of fixed asset. ICDS only applies to sale of goods which are regularly sold in the course of business. And ICDS 5 which deals with fixed asset, but there again they have specifically made a provision that to the extent of income arising from sale of fixed asset, the provisions of the act should apply, that is section 50 should apply. And in any case, section 50 or the provisions of the act being more specific and therefore, no provisions of the ICDS can overrule section 50. I think all three questions are answered.
okay. Yeah, Mr. Palkar, he has raised the hand. Ashok, can you unmute him? Palkar Makarand.
I have unmuted.
Hello. Unmute. Hello.
Yes.
Jaran bhai, I'm NB Gandhi here. This
Yes.
sale of license was my query. Okay. This sale of license, normally this question comes specifically in last 2 quarters of the accounting year. The application is made by the fag end of the year or the next year. And as Ashok said that the thing, they write the license amount which you are entitled for that. There is these licenses are freely sellable. There is a complete market for this market, but the prices of these licenses are fluctuating. So my question is, which is the right method? Should I account it on the basis of actual sale, or should I take some value on the basis, I say this license value is 1 lakh, I am likely to get say 80,000, I will value it 80,000 as closing stock of license.
So my personal opinion is that till the time you realize some income from license, either by selling the license or by utilizing it in your business, till that time there is no income, real income which has accrued in your favor. You have a valid asset which has a certain value which may increase or decrease, but till the time the asset is realized or converted or monetized, till such time no real income accrues. To take a case where you transfer the license to a particular firm, and that particular firm pays you money after 90 days. So that sale should be recognized even in spite of the fact you have not received money because you follow mercantile system of accounting. But just because you receive a license does not mean you have earned anything till the time you monetize such license.
Exactly. Okay, so actual sale of license is the right accounting as far as this sale of license is concerned.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Dharan.